for joining today. My name is Ksenia Kirichenko. I'm a UN Program Manager at ILGA World, also human rights lawyer, advocate, and researcher, and intersectional feminist. We are here today because it's been a year since the crackdown against nationwide protests in Iran, and today we want to present to you a report on gender-based persecution of LGBTI persons in Iran during the 2022-2023 protests. Our speakers will provide you with a legal analysis of the anti-LGBTI crimes in Iran, particularly the applicability of the framework of crime of gender persecution. They also will explore not only Iran's circumstances, but will breach the findings of the report to other contexts where we see LGBTI persons being persecuted, including in countries such as Afghanistan, Mali, Iraq, and Ukraine. Last but not least, we would also like to provide you today some recommendations to the international community on the ways to take actions against the crime of gender persecution in Iran. And before I introduce to you our brilliant speakers today, we have very few housekeeping rules. So this event is broadcasted, it's online, and if we have any audience online behind the screens, please don't be shy and send your questions online to us. And then also the second thing is that please don't take any pictures or videos unless you are an organizer or an accredited journalist. So thank you for this in advance. And now we have four speakers. Two of them are sitting here, two of them are joining online. On the right hand from myself, Shadi Amin. Shadi is a pioneering Iranian LGBT rights activist, writer, and researcher. She published Gender X, a book about the situation of LGBTI individuals in Iran, and co-authored the Crime and Impunity, Sexual Torture of Women in Islamic Prisons. Shadi is also a co-founder of human rights organization Justice for Iran, the founder and executive director of Shishrang, Iranian Lesbian and Transgender Network, and a former board member of ILGA World. As the executive director of Shishrang, Shadi has run several research and advocacy projects carried out in Iran, which also engaged the international community and human rights mechanisms. So welcome, Shadi. Also, we have online joined us Elena Aranda, who is co-secretary general of ILGA World, a global federation of more than 1,800 organizations from over 170 countries and territories campaigning for LGBTI human rights. Elena is also a bisexual activist and the general director of Las Reinas Chulas Cabaret and Human Rights Assé, and director of the International Cabaret Festival. Elena worked with different organizations and has developed a theater component for the incorporation of the gender approach in the Mexican microfinance institutions, has created a campaign against poverty, and worked in a project focused on indigenous people, rural populations, and women victims of violence in Mexico. Another expert that we have today also online is Sareta Asharph, who is an international criminal lawyer. She serves as a senior legal advisor to the Center for Justice and Accountability and to U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's Center for the Prevention of Genocide, and lectures at the Geneva Academy on Gender and International Crimes. Previously, Sareta was the Director of Investigations at UNITAD, worked on several UN commissions on inquiries and fact-finding missions, and also appeared as counsel before the International Criminal Court and the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And last but not least, also we have today with us Akila Radhakrishnan, who is a feminist international lawyer and a globally recognized expert on issues of reproductive rights, gender-based violence, and justice and accountability. She's the president of the Global Justice Center, where she has led the development of groundbreaking legal work on abortion access in conflict and the role that gender plays in genocide. The Global Justice Center is a human rights organization using international law to achieve gender equality and dismantle systems of oppression. It combines feminist legal analysis with strategic advocacy to ensure equal protection of the law for women and girls. So welcome, the panel. And my first question to Shadi. So Shadi, your organization, Shishrang, just published this report that is called War on Bodies and Minds, Gender Persecution of LGBTIQ+ Protesters in the Context of the 2022-23 Iran Uprisings. Can you tell us about how you made this report, how you wrote this report, and what are the main findings that you formulated based on the research that you conducted?
Thank you very much, Ksenia. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I believe that all of you in this room are aware of the Woman Life Freedom Uprising and the government's brutal crackdown last year. And however, there is significantly less awareness about the deprivation of fundamental rights experienced by members of the LGBTI community during this protest, and I am grateful that you are here today to listen to their voice. From the outset of the uprising, our organization received reports from our network inside Iran indicating that LGBT+ protesters had been targeted either in the middle of protest or subjected to aggravated violence due to their real or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. Earlier this year, we initiated a research project to understand the extent and gravity of human rights violations experienced by individuals perceived as LGBT+ during protests. We sought to evaluate whether these violations amounted to international crimes. We employed a variety of methods to gain a deeper understanding of the situation, including in-depth interviews, surveys, and the collection of written communications and evidence. In total, 70 LGBT+ protesters participated in our research, and additionally, we reviewed statements made by Iranian officials regarding the protests in general and the role of the LGBT+ community in particular. Since the onset of the nationwide protest last year, rather than addressing the legitimate demands of the people, high-ranking officials, including the Supreme Leader of Islamic Republic, labeled them as part of a hybrid war. Within this narrative, they accused Western states and Israel of leading a combination of traditional and new warfare tactics, including cyber, media, intelligence, and military operations aimed at overthrowing the Islamic Republic. Consequently, they executed a brutal crackdown on peaceful protests, resulting in at least 500 deaths, including 70 children, thousands severely injured, and over 20,000 detainees who were subjected to torture, sexual abuse, and even rape, as well as enforced disappearances on a widespread scale. The LGBT+ community was already suffering under discriminatory laws and policies that criminalize same-sex conduct, with punishments ranging from the death penalty to flogging. They also faced a range of restrictions on gender expression, including mandatory hijab laws and state-sponsored hate speech characterizing homosexuals as sick, perverted, and animal-like. These conditions prevailed even before the protests began a year ago, following the death of 22-year-old Kurdish woman, Gina Mahsa Amini, while in the custody of the morality police. The accounts of the participants in our research, detailed in the report, reveal horrifying situations. For example, individuals were targeted by security forces in the middle of protests and subjected to sexual assault solely because their gender expression differed from others. Some were interrogated about their sexual orientation while being arrested for actions such as graffitiing woman life freedom on walls. To assess whether these actions amounted to international crimes, we evaluated the facts against the standards set out by International Criminal Court. We specifically referenced the recently published ICC policy on the crime of gender persecution, as no other legal framework could be more applicable to this situation. Persecution is defined as the international and severe deprivation of fundamental rights contrary to international law by reason of the identity of the group or collectivity. Gender persecution is committed against individuals due to their sex characteristics and/or based on the social constructs and criteria used to define gender. The evidence presented in our report confirms that those perceived as transgressing gender norms that define accepted forms of gender expression were more likely to be targeted during the crackdown and subjected to greater brutality. Thus, they fit the ICC's definition of victims of gender persecution. Various units, including the police, IRGC, Passage militia, Ministry of Intelligence agents and their branches in education, healthcare, universities, factories, and government offices violated their rights to life, freedom from torture or other inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, freedom of assembly, opinion, expression, movement, and religion, as well as right to equality, dignity, bodily integrity, privacy, and security based on gender through the use of various forms of violence. I am confident that our panelists will, with the legal background, will discuss the elements of the crimes in more detail. Therefore, I will conclude my remarks here and welcome any question about the findings of the report and the situation of the LGBTI community in Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shadi, and thanks for just bringing these horrible crimes, horrible events to the world, not keeping them just invisibilized. But my question is because obviously Shishran has connections to local communities, and what would you say? What is the Iranian LGBTQI+ community, especially those people who were subjected to this horrible violence and crimes, what do they expect the international community and UN human rights mechanisms to do?
So thank you for the question. I think the main expectation of the LGBT+ community in Iran is that you listen to their voice, you listen to their demands, that they have the feeling their existence will be acknowledged. This is the first one, and not only in US mechanisms, but also from the member states. So, and the second one is that we acknowledge that the issue about the LGBT+ rights often will disappear under the general issues of human rights in border issues of human rights, and we have to change that. We have to make more the situation of the LGBT+ people visible. And the other one is that the FFM, Fact Findings Committee, and Special Rapporteur and independent expert on SOGIESC issues, they acknowledge that the gender persecution has happened in Iran. So And this is for us very important that we accept and acknowledge that LGBT plus have been subjected to crimes against humanity through gender persecution. And the last but not least point is that the state members and UN mechanisms, they use all the influence to stop hate speech in Iran, to abolishing the death penalty from the criminal law in Iran, and stop criminalizing the same-sex conduct. These are points which I think they are important in the situation now in Iran.
Thank you, Shadi, and we will have more time to ask Shadi any other questions. And now I would like to give the floor to Luz Elena Aranda, who is also joining us, but online. And my question to Luz Elena is, what are your thoughts as of a global leader of a worldwide federation about the report, about the findings that Sheshrang revealed? And if you can draw some parallels between what is happening and what happened in Iran with any other regions and countries in the world.
Thank you, Ksenia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. So, as the Co-Secretary General of ILGA World, I would like to express my deep concern and commitment to addressing the issues highlighted in the report published by Sixth Rank. The findings of this report shed light on a grave situation that demands urgent attention and action from both the international community and organizations like ILGA World. The primary findings of the Sixth Rank report reveal a disturbing pattern of gender persecution against LGBTI individuals in Iran and the broader context of the Middle East and Asia. This is indeed a form of crime against humanity, as it involves systematic and widespread human rights violations that target at a specific group based on their gender identity and sexual orientation. The report's assertion that gender persecution against LGBTI individuals often goes unnoticed by the international community is deeply troubling, but unfortunately consistent with patterns observed in other regions as well. The report provides a comprehensive and deeply concerning account of the human rights violations and atrocities that occurred during and after the 2022-2023 protests in Iran. It highlights the particularly dire situation faced by LGBTI individuals, adding to the broader context of gender persecution within the protest. The calls made by Sixth Rank are critical and aligned with the principles of human rights, equality, and justice that are at the core of international norms and standards. The reported atrocities during 2022-2023 protests in Iran, particularly those targeting LGBTI protesters, must be taken seriously by the international community and addressed through appropriate mechanisms. Here are some key points to consider in response to Sixth Rank's calls. Recognitions of crimes against humanity. The international community, including UN human rights mechanisms, should investigate and recognize the reported atrocities committed during the protests in Iran as potential crimes against humanity. Accountability. Holding the regime accountable for gender persecution targeting LGBTI protesters is essential to ensuring justice for the victims. This could involve pursuing legal actions at the international level, such as through the International Criminal Court, as sixth branch suggests. Decriminalization of same-sex relations. The full decriminalization of same-sex sexual relations is a fundamental step toward protecting the rights and dignity of LGBTI individuals. Laws criminalizing consensual same-sex relationships perpetuate discrimination, violence, and stigma. International pressure should be applied to urge governments to repeal such laws. Ending discrimination and violence. Governments worldwide should be urged to take measures to end discrimination and violence against LGBTI persons. This includes implementing anti-discrimination laws, providing training to law enforcement and judiciary personnel, and ensuring access to justice for victims of violence. Protection of gender non-conforming people. Special attention must be given to the protection of gender non-conforming individuals who often face heightened risk of violence and discrimination. Legal and social protections should be put in place to ensure their safety and well-being. Stop incitement of hatred. Governments and institutions should take proactive steps to combat the incitement of hatred against LGBTI community. This includes countering hate speech and promoting education and awareness to foster tolerance and acceptance. International support. The international community, including human rights organizations and governments, should express solidarity with organizations like Sixth Rank and support their efforts in advocating for the rights of LGBTI individuals in Iran. This support can include diplomatic pressure, funding, and capacity building initiatives. The call made by Sixth Rank is a powerful reminder of the ongoing human rights violations faced by LGBTI individuals in Iran and elsewhere in the region, and echo the findings of studies conducted by Outright International and Human Rights Watch. If we want to talk about other regions drawing parallels, we can see that LGBTI individuals face similar persecution and discrimination in various parts of the world. In many countries, particularly those with oppressive regimes or conflict situations, LGBTI people are subjected to violence, discrimination, and human rights abuses. For example, in Africa, countries like Uganda and Nigeria have implemented harsh anti-LGBTI laws, and individuals in these regions face severe persecution. In many regions, including Europe, Asia, and Africa, deeply ingrained societal prejudice against non-heteronormative gender identities and sexual orientation persist. This discrimination can be exacerbated during times of conflict when social norms and hierarchies become more pronounced. This was evident during the Ukraine war. LGBTIQ+ individuals are often marginalized and stigmatized in society, making them vulnerable to persecution. During conflicts, when institutions and social structures may break down, these vulnerabilities can become more pronounced as individuals lose the protection of their communities. Many countries do not have legal protections for LGBTIQ+ individuals or have laws that actively criminalize homosexuality or gender not conforming behavior. In some regions, cultural and religious factors play a significant role in perpetuating discrimination against LGBTIQ+ individuals. These factors can make it challenging for international organizations and the broader international community to address these issues effectively. And I think for time, I will leave it here.
Thank you so much, Elena. And indeed, we can see situations which are in a way similar to what is happening in Iran, in some other countries and regions where there are oppressive governments, oppressive regimes, wars, conflicts. But my question is, you are a co-secretary of ILGA World, and what ILGA World as a global federation can do to support LGBTIQ plus communities in Iran and other places where they are targeted in the general context of severe human rights violations and atrocities.
So here, thank you for the question. Here are some ideas. We must engage in diplomatic efforts to advocate governments to respect the rights of LGBTI individuals. This includes advocating for changes in discriminatory laws, policies, and practices. We must provide resources and support to local organizations in affected regions, helping them build capacity, raise awareness, and advocate for their rights at the national and international levels. We must conduct further research and documentation of human rights abuses against LGBTI individuals, shedding light on the extent of the problem and providing evidence for advocacy. Of course, support organizations like Sixth Rank to continue to engage with international bodies, such as the UN, to ensure that the rights of LGBTI individuals are on the global agenda and that their specific situations are considered in conflict and human rights discussions. Express solidarity with organizations like Sixth Rank and support their efforts in raising awareness and advocating for the rights of LGBTI individuals in Iran and beyond. ILGA World is committed to addressing the gender persecution of LGBTI individuals globally and will work collaboratively with organizations, governments, and activists to ensure that these human rights violations are brought to an end and that LGBTI individuals are protected and treated with dignity and respect everywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you for providing to us this overview of the situation and ideas on how ILGA as a global federation can also support and contribute to revealing these violations, to supporting local communities, and to just to ensure or at least require investigation, establishment of facts, and then also accountability and reparations. Thanks, Elena. And we also have another speaker online, Sareta. Sareta, you are an internationally recognized expert on gender and genocide. And throughout your career, you worked with various mechanisms seeking accountability for international crimes. From your perspective, how the international justice system can respond or is responding to gender persecution against LGBTQI plus people in conflict and atrocities?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. It's an excellent question. Often when I'm speaking about gender and international crimes, I start off by saying that the history of international criminal accountability is also a narrative of a struggle to surface the very nuanced and multidimensional experiences of marginalized people and communities. Certainly among those communities, and often one of the communities which is most marginalized and most obscured in the discussion of both justice and accountability is the LGBTQI plus community, including non-binary and gender non-conforming persons. When the 1998 Rome Statute was adopted, the framework took a big leap forward. in terms of at least structurally providing a pathway to justice for this community. Gender-based persecution as a crime against humanity was not an enumerated crime until the 1998 Rome Statute was adopted. As with all forms of persecution, accountability for gender persecution requires the establishment of the underlying discrimination. But certainly what became clear, which was, I think, part of the intention of the drafters at the time, and what has become increasingly clear and increasingly has been illuminated by the Office of the Prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, is that targeting men, women, girls, boys, members of the LGBTQI community, non-binary and gender non-conforming persons on gender grounds is a crime against humanity. So what do we mean when we say gender grounds? And this is something that the ICC itself has continued to burrow into and to give indications of how that is going to be interpreted by prosecutors and by, of course, eventually by judges. So in Article 7.3, and I'm not going to go into a full legal lecture, as this is the only time I'm going to quote an article, but it defines gender as, and this is from the adoption of the Rome Statute, so this is 1998, defines gender as the two sexes, male and female, within the context of society. Within that definition, you can already see potentially a more conservative vein and a more progressive vein. First, of course, with the defining of the two sexes, now not really our understanding of gender, but then within the context of society, which opened up a door for more progressive and more multi-dimensional understanding of gender. In 2014, the prosecution put out a paper on sexual and gender-based crimes, in which it went a little bit further and said the social construction of gender and accompanying roles, behaviors, attributes, and activities and attributes assigned to men, women, boys, and girls, suggesting then that social construction was an important aspect to understanding what gender is in society. Last year, the ICC Office of the Prosecutor released a new policy paper on gender persecution. And in that policy paper, it clarified the meaning of gender under international criminal law and unequivocally stated that gender refers to sex characteristics and social constructs and criteria used to define maleness and femaleness, including roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes. And noted there very specifically that social constructs used to define gender include sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. So the policy paper itself was an important step forward in holding perpetrators accountable when they commit violence against people due to their perceived sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or sex characteristics. But it also allowed for a deeper understanding of why LGBTQI people are targeted for violent crimes, understanding how the crimes are designed and carried out against this community, against members of this community in different ways, potentially for different purposes, both purposes that are designed to advance the strategic aims of the perpetrators, but also purposes which feed into what are usually the underlying biases and inequalities and chauvinisms of the society where the violence is taking place. So determining whether a crime amounts to gender persecution involves examining the perpetrator's intent, which may overlap or exacerbate existing social constructs, or may represent an effort to impose new ones. And so I think here, one of the things that I think that the 2022 gender persecution policy paper does particularly well is say that gender persecution across the board, including against members of the LGBTQI community, don't just occur out of nowhere. They often rise up from those pre-existing inequalities, that pre-existing violence or tolerance to violence that exists in the society, although it may also be with a kind of a very violent new regime coming in, often be an effort to really entrench new levels of violence and discrimination and deprivation of fundamental rights against the LGBTI community. So to get into your question, there has been the international criminal justice system, largely through the ICC, where gender persecution is codified, has made moves to prosecute gender persecution. We can see that it exists in 3 cases currently before the ICC. None of them as yet involve bringing charges relating to the treatment or violations against sexual and gender minorities. The 3 cases relate to Mali, Sudan, and the Central African Republic. I'm not going to go into the details of all the cases, but I did want to point out one thing that is common to each of the cases. 2 things which are common. One, obviously, the use of gender-based persecution in each of the cases seems to indicate that the rails against the attitudinal, there isn't a strong attitudinal block towards charging gender persecution. It is becoming slowly part of the everyday fabric of trying to understand what crimes are committed. That doesn't mean it's a perfect system, but certainly we are seeing it now being charged. The second thing in that all 3 cases, the prosecutor and the ICC pretrial chamber who confirmed charges have taken quite an intersectional approach to persecution, and so are really quite overt in understanding that people are really, communities which are often marginalized and face violence even prior to situations of mass atrocity and are then subjected to persecution as a crime against humanity, are rarely persecuted solely on one dimension of their person. That people are often oppressed on multiple grounds. So in Al Hassan in Mali, you had gender-based persecution as well as religious persecution, and that related to the enforcement of an extreme interpretation of Sharia law on the population of Timbuktu, Mali, by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and Ansar Din. In Al Rahman in Sudan, they charged, it was a case against men and boys, but was expressly charged as gender-based crime, but noted persecution as intersecting on political, ethnic, and gender grounds. And then finally, in the Central African Republic, in the Said case, there was, again, intersecting political, ethnic, and gender grounds. In the Al Hassan case in Mali, the chamber was really took steps to point out intersectionality between gender and racial discrimination, noting that violence against women with darker skin was greater and often more brutal than violence against others, as was the case for men with darker skin as well. So we are seeing that movement forward when it comes to first, I think, structurally interweaving in the framework of gender persecution and understanding of gender, which clearly sets out a path for investigating, indicting, and prosecuting gender persecution against the LGBTQI community, and also then movements now to investigate and indict and charge gender persecution, really with a much more hopefully intersectional lens. It appears in the cases. I just want to leave with one thought, because I'm coming up to time now. I might even be slightly over. When it comes to those of us who are investigating and documenting gender persecution, including against the LGBTI community, non-binary, non-gender conforming community members, often we will recognize the challenges institutionally in training investigators, in making sure analysts really understand that trying to eliminate a kind of blindness as to that this is a community that also needs to be included in investigation plans, and also that they're not that the approach to them should not be unidimensional. But what has been incredibly important is knowing that actually outreach needs to be different. One of the challenges that we've had, for example, in Iraq, is really just coming to grips with the fact that this is a community that has routinely experienced violence pre-conflict, pre-ISIL. They've had very generally unsuccessful interactions with justice systems across the board. And so those experiences and their experiences in the country, even prior to be suffering an attack by ISIL, have meant that it is not necessarily straightforward in trying to build trust and build positive interactions, even with those who are there and ready to document. So there needs to be, I think, more understanding of the need for a very specialized outreach strategy if we're going to document these crimes successfully, that documentation being the foundation of further justice and accountability efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sareta. And we also have last speaker, and after that we will go to questions from the audience, I promise. So Akila, we also have a lot of experience with gender prosecution, with international justice, criminal justice. What would be, from your perspective, avenues for communities affected by such crimes? What would be the avenues, where to go?
Thank you so much for having me. And, I think this is the question that often comes to us from our partners in, many different places, right? What you see something like the UN system and you go, what are these mechanisms? What can they do? What can they actually meaningfully bring? And what's the piece of the justice and accountability picture? So I think, maybe before we delve into perhaps criminal law, I think it's good to take a step back, right? So when we talk about things like gender persecution, we're talking about the deprivation of human rights. And so I think in these conversations, we often forget about the human rights system. And I actually think that's where we need to have a starting point, is to how across the various mechanisms of the human rights system, through public reporting, through other mechanisms, you can actually start to expose what's happened in these situations, right? What is happening to LGBTQI individuals. You can take a progressive approach, integrating, for example, the non-discrimination frameworks of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. That really can help to reveal the scope of the violations that we're talking about, before we even get to, let's say, individual criminal accountability in a court of some sort, right? And I think the importance of also making sure that we address the human rights system is that it lets you get to the systems. It lets you get to the state, not just one particular individual and what they did, but oftentimes when you're talking about gender-based discrimination, whether against women, whether against LGBTQI persons, you're talking about an entire system that spends its time and is motivated in a way in which it oppresses individuals. So I think we need to think about, and in the context of Iran, I work on the United States, so I know this as well, there's often not a lot of treaties that have been signed. So, you do have limited frameworks, but you need to look at the depth of each of the places. In this context, you can look at the ICCPR. Some of the documented cases were against, LGBTQI individuals who were children. There's a case in the report of a young woman who was 16 years old, so thinking about the Convention on the Rights of the Child. You've already mentioned some of the work that's going on with the fact-finding mission that's been mandated, and those are the places to start exposing the depth of these violations and really what is the language of what's happened. And then, of course, there is criminal accountability, and here we've been talking about the crime of gender persecution, which, as Sareta described, was something that was kind of first codified within the Rome Statute, but now you've seen prosecutions in other places. And again, it would be great if we could think about Iran at the ICC, but right now that's not an option unless we think about the Security Council or other avenues. And so I think universal jurisdiction is a really promising way, perhaps, to think about individual criminal accountability. So universal jurisdiction, for those who are not lawyers in the room, is a principle that allows crimes that have committed in other places to be prosecuted by other countries. And so, here, Germany is a really good emblematic example where they currently have prosecutions for crimes that took place, as Sareta was talking about, in Iraq under ISIL. And there they've actually had a case filed a couple of years back specifically on gender persecution of LGBTQI individuals in Chechnya. In a Yazidi case, they actually did, in the case of Sarah O, they actually did have a conviction on the basis of gender persecution. And so really thinking perhaps about opportunities to institute a structural investigation in a country like Germany, in countries like Sweden. Switzerland has very robust universal jurisdiction laws as well. So to start thinking about where are those other avenues for holding individuals to account. And so I think that, I work a lot on Myanmar, where we are in a place where we're stuck in terms of the options to, think about what justice and accountability looks like. But when you start kind of digging into the deeper places, you can identify what may or may not be avenues, that you can pursue these issues and how you can bring a gender perspective to anything that's happening, right? So it's one thing to focus on instituting something for gender persecution, but every crime is gendered. And so every avenue that exists for accountability, a gender perspective can be brought to it. So, in the context, for example, I was talking about Myanmar, there's an ongoing case at the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention. And there is an effort to actually think through and expose the gendered elements of genocide as a part of that case. So even though the case isn't focused on gender, there's ways to expose that type of violation, including against LGBTQI individuals.
Thank you so much. And I think that maybe it's also some ideas already for states that are presented here. But now let's have any questions to our panelists. Any thoughts, comments, questions?
There's somebody there.
Uh-huh. Is there a question there? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I'm Hasiba. I work with the fact-finding mission on Iran. I'd like to know so you've mentioned 70 interviews, and you've mentioned as well reviewing statements by the authorities. I was just wondering what are the various elements that you took into account to reach a conclusion of the crime against humanity of gender persecution. If you could help us unpack this together. Thank you.
She was asking about the reporting, so I think maybe talk about broader elements.
Oh, okay.
If you want.
Thank you very much, Asiba. So, as I explained before, we did 70 interviews. So, and in most of these interviews, we realized that these persons are, because of their unconforming gender to the accepted gender by the authorities, they had experienced more brutality when they were arrested, and the kind of the brutality was oriented on their sex, gender, and their sexual orientation. And it is only what we see, 70 persons are the persons who could reach out to us and give their report to us. But we think there are much more persons, young people who have faced this situation. First of all, that it happens in a wider atrocities what happened in last year. And when we compare this crackdown in let's say till February, we can compare that with the Aban in 1998. It means 4 years ago, 2019. So with the protest in 2019, from the SR and Aban Tribunal, they were acknowledged as a crime against humanity. So, and then we think in the framework of this this legal framework, we can say that the oppression on LGBT people has happened in this crime against humanity, and we can call it gender persecution, is first of that, first reason. And the second one is that they are a group of people who, before that, they have faced policies and laws which discriminate the existence of LGBT people, but this is really focused from the police and IRGC. It is, they have a policy to do that. So we see that all of them in different cities, the challenges for the LGBTI community is the same. It means it is not the cases that happens because a policeman has hates the LGBT people or is homophobic. We see that the pattern is in all the cities is the same. So, and I think we need really more investigation, structural investigation, as Akila said, and we need more, first of all, evidences what we collected, and we can deliver them to you. We provided all these evidences, what we can, some of them are in the reports. Please read the report, and if you want, you can scan here the QR code, and you have the report then. But otherwise, we can deliver all the information and evidences we have, and they are not included necessarily in the report.
Thank you, Shadi. Any other questions? Oh, there is one? Yes.
Hello, I'm Sun. I work with Franciscans International, and I was interested in knowing, since you described the evolution of the UN framework on gender grounds and gender-based crimes, what is the next step so that the UN framework can maybe better address specific issues faced by LGBT communities around the world? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. I'll try to be very brief here. I think that as a feminist lawyer, it's a long-standing struggle to have gender and gendered experiences recognized under law, and that has been, a big battle of feminist lawyers over the last 30 years. And you can kind of track the different places where that recognition happened, right? Because today we sit in a space where it's almost, inherently obvious that we would talk about sexual violence as a part of the types of violations that occur in these situations. But it wasn't until the 90s, in certain ways that jurisprudence developed, that we stopped thinking of sexual violence as kind of this other thing that happens in things like conflict, but rather is a war crime. It's a constitutive act of genocide. And so that development has been ongoing. And I think that now we're in a space where the way that we understand gender as not something that is binary, as something that does involve LGBTQI individuals, that's the learning that we need to take so that these, the progress that we have made on gender, which oftentimes does kind of focus on cis women, is actually able to be, further deepen our understanding how gender operates and how gender and sexual violence actually, takes place in a variety of contexts against a variety of individuals.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, our time is now, we don't have any more time, but if you have more questions, please come and ask our panelists. It was really wonderful panel, and we learned, I guess, so much. And thank you so much for everyone, and especially for Shadi to, I think, dedicating your life to your community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Amin.
Thank you. I wanted to thank you, thanks everyone as the organizers, Justice for Iran. We organized the panel that day so that really the focus on gender persecution could be discussed, and we hope to continue the discussion with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.